Thank you for joining us for today's InMoment webinar. I'm Melissa Harrod, and I'll be moderating today's event. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This webcast is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording within the next 24 hours. We will have time at the end for Q&A. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it into the question box on your screen. We'll get to as many of those submitted questions as we can during that Q&A time. With me today are Dr. Jennifer Passini and Laura Johnson. Jennifer is Senior Director of CX Solutions Strategy at InMoment and is responsible for providing CX consultative support to organizations who are looking to implement new programs or enhance their existing efforts. Jennifer is aligned with the financial services industry, where she has been helping clients for 19 years. Jennifer serves as a subject matter expert and provides thought leadership for CX design and execution, marketing research, and financial services. Laura Johnson is Senior Director of Customer Insights and Analytics at Synovus, where she is responsible for leading the customer experience practice, the voice of the customer program, and marketing analytics functions. Laura has 2 decades of experience in financial services with a background in database marketing, strategic analytics, and customer experience. She joined Synovus in 2015 to lead customer experience and analytics in retail banking, where she built the inaugural Voice of Customer program and established the protocol for customer journey mapping best practices. And with that, Jennifer, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Thanks, Melissa, and welcome everybody today. And I'm glad you went through introductions. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide so we can talk about the topics that we'll focus on today. So we're going to focus in 4 areas that are related to COVID-19 and specifically look at the impact and support for small business owners, which also includes their employees as well, given that they're one of the hardest hit audiences during the pandemic. Our topics today will focus on the impact that the pandemic had on small businesses. I'm really happy that Laura from Synovus Bank was able to join me today, and she's going to give some different perspectives on how banks can have leverage, and especially how Synovus Bank has leveraged their CX program to support and guide their support of small businesses, and how the bank has successfully reacted to the pandemic for their small business customers and for prospects. And then we'll talk a little bit about the future and what to expect next. The bottom line is that there really is no data to help us predict what's next. Not really. When you think about even the downturn of the economy in 2008, we can look to see what we did during that time, but this is really different, and the actions that we've taken have been really different, not only for our customers but for our individual businesses. Whether you're a bank or even InMoment has taken different routes based and not really knowing what to expect, but leveraging feedback and leveraging input to do that. So we can really only rely on data and feedback to help us shape what we do in the future. And so that's really what we're going to focus on in that section. And so we will talk about, and we've asked small businesses specifically about their future needs and intentions. And then finally, we'll wrap up with Laura coming back on to talk about what Synovus Bank plans to continue for their small business, how they plan to continue their support based on their CX program specifically. So that's the topics for today. And I wanted to spend just a bit of time talking about the webinar sources. So, obviously Laura has experience coming into the bank, but we InMoment also invested in a small business poll to help us understand the impact of the pandemic on small businesses. As I mentioned, there's really no historical data that we can rely on to really understand the impact of the pandemic, and then also to help shape what we should be doing in terms of support and predict what's next. So we did the poll really to help us understand what small businesses were going through, what the impact and what financial support they were exploring with financial institutions, and how it's impacting their futures. And so I want to just talk about the poll just a little bit as a source that we leveraged for a lot of the input into today's webinar. The target audience for our poll was small businesses who, based on their firmographics, would have qualified for PPP. So all of the banks are talking about PPP. You can't turn on the news and not hear about PPP. particularly related to small businesses. And so we focused there. We surveyed 500 small business owners or financial decision makers. And as I mentioned, the poll focused on COVID-19, the impact of the pandemic, what financial support they saw and with whom, their perceptions of handling of financial support and what that reach out looked like, and then what the small businesses' future intentions are related to their operating models and financial needs moving forward. By the way, all of you that signed up for today's webinar will receive a copy of the full report because I'm only going to focus on a subset of findings today. So there may be other takeaways that you'll glean from that report. But I wanted just to mention that you'll receive that report. So you might be wondering where some of these results came from. I'm also pleased as another source for this webinar. I'm pleased, as I mentioned, that Laura from Synovus Bank has joined me for the webinar. Synovus Bank has been a valued client of Merit CX for many years, and I'm excited for Laura to not only tell you about her program, but I asked Laura to join me for today's webinar because the bank has been recognized for successfully navigating their responses specifically for small businesses during the pandemic. And I think there's great things to learn from the bank's approach. So as you can see on the slide here, there's a bit of details about Synovus Bank. They're headquartered in Columbus, Georgia, in a beautiful campus there, and they have a strong history of meeting financial needs. So I think they're a great source, and Laura, thank you for joining me today. So those are the sources for our webinar. That's where a lot of this content has come from. The most important takeaway that I hope that you learn from today is that Synovus and other banks are in a position where they can be a true partner for small businesses moving forward. And I wanted to say that it would be really easy for us in this webinar to go negative because with the pandemic, there's been just a lot of negative impact. But I want to focus today in today's webinar on focusing on opportunities and silver linings. There's been tons of bad news, and there's still a lot to be concerned about. However, I think with COVID and a lot of the things that we're learning from customers, how they're interacting with us, and also just, some of the new expectations that have been set, either in the short term or long term, we're not really sure yet, there are a lot of opportunities. So while I'll take a brief detour in some of the bad news and focus on the impact that COVID has had on small businesses, I'm hoping that for the rest of the webinar, we can agree to focus on the positives and some of the specific opportunities that banks have to be a better financial services partner to them, a better financial services partner to small businesses specifically. So, obviously small businesses were the hardest hit. This includes their employees. We found in our poll that 84% of small businesses were negatively impacted by the pandemic. Not surprising here, especially given all the media coverage that's out there. As I mentioned, you really can't turn on the TV without hearing some of the negative aspects of what we're dealing with related to the pandemic. Personally, I've learned that I didn't realize how much my family relies on and loves small businesses until they were closed or we didn't have access to them. And, I personally finally convinced my husband to allow us to get takeout when I said, your Drunken Noodle restaurant that you love is going to close if we don't get people to start supporting them through takeout. And so, I think that there's a lot of, and people talk about small businesses as being a fabric of our country. I think we're starting to, all of this has helped us realize that from a positive standpoint. So, as I mentioned, media has really been highlighting the impact of small business. In March, again, it's early in the pandemic, but a study conducted by Harvard, University of Illinois, University of Chicago, reported that 43% of small businesses anticipated that they'll close due to the pandemic. Then in April, we heard from Forbes that 7.5 million businesses were at risk without federal support, which led to a lot of the conversations around PPP and other small business solutions that were funded by legislation. And then in May, we conducted our poll between May 19th and the 21st, But Forbes also reported that as of that point, which I think was around May 9th, 100 businesses had permanently closed. And in our poll, we found that 38% of businesses had closed, and another 9% believe that they would close in the future. So that's kind of been the negative impact, just to make sure that we were all clear on the impact the pandemic has had on businesses and why we focused here. So now let's talk about the good news, or let's focus on some good news. So the pandemic has forced all of us, whether it's, how you deal with things related to your home or how you work, we've all had to kind of reimagine our activities. The same is true for small businesses. So I can identify personally things that I did during the pandemic that I'd never done before. For me, I used mobile deposits. I ordered groceries online and had them delivered. I had a virtual doctor's appointment, all of which I would never have tried before the pandemic. The same is true for small businesses, and many, in order to have some type of revenue stream, they've had to reimagine their service delivery model or their operating models. We asked about this in our poll, and 50% at this time said that they remained open, but in a limited capacity with modified delivery methods. Additionally, when we asked about future intentions, 21% of those that were closed at the time of our poll mentioned that they would reopen, but in a reimagined operating model, so something different. Of those, 41% have implemented new safety measures. They mentioned that. 36% created flexible working arrangements for their employees. Unfortunately, 25% had, at the time of the poll, had either laid off or an additional 25% had furloughed employees. So there's been a big impact, but there's been a lot of great things that have come through reimagining. Good Morning America actually has a segment, which this graphic that you see on the slide is related to that segment, that have asked for small businesses to share how they've creatively reimagined their operating models to continue to stay in business and meet the needs of their customers. Restaurants with creative approaches for delivering curbside. Dance studios with video conference classes. I know that one of my coworkers, his daughters were taking video dance classes. Craft stores who have typically are making kits and teaching classes remotely, so the kits can be delivered, and then they're teaching the classes online, so they're working together. Child care places have virtual day camps, and so that kids can still see their friends and interact with each other. And there's so many more examples. And I always kind of tune into Good Morning America later just to see what small business they've highlighted. But those small businesses that have been nimble and flexible and imaginative in their new operating model have the greatest chance of survival. And they're also setting future expectations among customers. But the reality is that even with a reimagined operating model, it's not enough. Most need some type of financial support. And the Small Business Association reports that most small businesses, or only a third of small businesses, have more than 2 months cash reserves, meaning that most do not. And now that we're 4 months into the pandemic, it's having a real impact for small businesses. And they've been reaching out for financial support. They've been reaching out to their primary banks for that. We found in our poll that at the time of the poll, which again was the third week in May, that 50% have reached out for help. And what's important here is that most have not just reached out to their primary institutions. They've reached out, in a lot of cases, to others too. The focus has been on PPP because of the loan forgiveness aspect of the solution. And we found in our poll that about 78% of those who applied for PPP actually received the loan. And you'll notice that beyond PPP, when we think about all the small businesses that sought financial assistance, 77% received something. So I think most are asking for and receiving support. This could include loans, grants, deferment requests, whatever. So one thing I did want to mention, which I don't have the fact on the slide, but there were 43% of small businesses that we polled that didn't seek any financial assistance at all. And those tended to be small businesses with very few employees. These businesses were less likely to report a negative impact of the pandemic. And when I think about these businesses, I think specifically about a fruit and vegetable stand that I visited a couple weeks ago, and the owner mentioned that he's experienced more business as people are planting their gardens and wanting fresh fruit and have time to do those things outside of work. So he's actually experienced more business, but again, they tend to be smaller with fewer employees, so less financial impact. I've heard about from all of you that InMoment works with today. I've heard about it all from you, that the strain of the pandemic has had on the bank as well. And so while small businesses are impacted, you guys as their financial institutions have also been impacted, particularly as many of our areas had shelter-in-place orders. There was an impact on your bank employees, particularly your branch and call center employees. You mentioned round-the-clock processing of loan applications, particularly around PPP. Your bank most likely experienced branch closures, some limited operating models, maybe drive-through only or appointment only, which you had to kind of reimagine for your branch network. So your bank also, similar to small businesses and similar to what we've done at home for our individual families, you've had to reimagine how to deliver what you do to your customers in different ways while still meeting their needs, both from a consumer and small business standpoint. So we asked the banks, we asked small businesses what banks could have done better to support businesses during this time. It was an open-end question, and what we learned is that many of the responses focused on products and services. So, they wanted different products and services, maybe more flexibility around them, removing fees or reducing fees, being more responsive, communicating more, providing advice. But one interesting thing that came up is the inability of small business customers to work with the bank in the ways that they want due to the limited operating models in the branches. In fact, 10% complained about not being able to go to the branch or the limited operations of the branch on an unaided basis, meaning that we didn't ask them about that specifically. And so they're definitely feeling the impact of the bank having to react to the pandemic by closing branches or limiting operations. By the way, I took this picture that you see on the side here about 2 weeks ago as my husband and I were waiting for takeout in a parking lot. And I said to him, this is a picture of a customer really missing his branch. And for many customers, the ATM is just not cutting it. So when I think of customers that are struggling with some of the branch closures, I think of this customer right here. And with that, I'll hand it off to Laura. Now that I've kind of teed up the impact of the pandemic again, that was the negative part. We're focusing on positivity now. I'd like to pass things on to Laura to talk about the Synovus Bank response. Again, Synovus was recognized as really being focused on the needs of small business during this time. And I mentioned that banks are having to shift gears and reimagine their response. And I think Laura and Synovus Bank with their CX program have really kind of shown how we can guide those efforts. So with that, I'll turn it over to Laura.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks so much for having me today. There really have been so many heroes across our organization throughout the COVID-19 response, especially on our front line, and I wish I could talk about all of them today. But as Jennifer mentioned, I'll focus specifically on our CX practice and especially around voice of the customer to talk a little bit about how we supported those efforts during this time. So one of my first calls when the crisis hit was to Jennifer, actually asking, should we pause our program? Our greatest source of voice of the customer data from a volume perspective really is our interaction surveys that are triggered by our branch visits and calls to our call center. And we had to figure out how we could keep listening while not overly taxing our customers with a request to fill out our survey. So the first thing we did after talking with our partners at InMoment was to update our invitation language to acknowledge the crisis and really reposition the survey as a way for our customers to tell us what they need at this time. We also stopped our reminders to cut back on the email customers would be receiving from us. And we absolutely saw the decline in response rate that we expected to see without those reminders going out. So we were monitoring it closely at this time, but we only saw about a 2% decline in survey response rates overall. I think our lowest response rate was about 8.5% at the lowest point, but more around 9 and 10%. So we were very happy with that. We also immediately triggered our open-ended customer comments to pull out any references to COVID, the coronavirus, the pandemic, and so on. And this really enabled us to turn around daily tracking and reporting for our executive management committee and to follow up directly with those customers, whether they expressed a concern or had an unresolved issue or simply didn't have the best experience they could possibly have. And those customer verbatims were going every single day to our executive management committee, our CEO, and we're on those calls each morning with that team discussed. So our customers' voices were definitely heard. And overall, we had about 58% of those comments related to COVID coming back as very positive sentiment around our efforts to keep customers and team members safe or praising the friendliness and professionalism of our teams. We were able to lift those up to our frontline teams and provide, quite frankly, what was some much needed encouragement during what was a challenging time for them as well. And of course, we watched our top line metrics very closely. And this is where the easy creation of dashboards came in handy for us. I think I probably had 3 or 4 at any one time up and running, because we weren't just tracking those response rates, but also our key experience metrics, such as satisfaction and our net promoter scores. And while we did see some softening in our wait time numbers in April and May, both at the branch and the call center, we didn't see that negative impact in other metrics, such as our branch satisfaction or the attributes of our bankers and tellers that we track. Their welcoming, their friendliness, their willingness to ask questions and get to know our customers. So we were very pleased with that. We actually saw a 10-point increase in our call center net promoter score, which is just amazing given some of the wait times that were encountered, and a 7% increase in our mortgage origination satisfaction, which is just awesome. We had a lot of loan originators out there making it work, helping people close, even given all of the challenges we had with social distancing. So a lot of good news there, but mostly what we focused on was just making sure that we got all that information out and that the folks making decisions in our organization were aware of what our customers were saying and what they were asking. So in addition to the listening, for us, communicating clearly and communicating often was really critical, especially for our small business customers. We actually, our digital marketing team sent more than 2.2 million customer emails in March and April, covering everything from how we are responding to COVID-19 and branch availability to announcements of the stimulus checks are posting and CARES Act updates. We also maintained a COVID-19 page on our website with big, bold time and date stamp right up front to help those current and prospective customers clearly identify that what they were reading was the most recent news. They didn't have to pore through it to see if anything had changed since the last time they checked in. Our digital team also launched a form for businesses to express their interest in the PPP and prior to the application process opening. And that gave our customers first, the ability to take action somewhere in what felt like a very stressful, anxious situation. So they were able to go ahead and fill out a form even before the applications were ready to be processed. And then we were able to use that data to proactively contact those customers back and say, it's time to apply and direct them straight to the full application. And we saw customers were very hungry for that relevant and targeted information. We saw a 41% open rate on our emails overall, which is extremely high. It was upwards of 67% among our business customers. And not surprisingly, the messages related to the status of their PPP loan application were incredibly critical to our customers during this time. We saw upwards of 90% open rate on those. You never see that. But these customers, what they were telling us, both with their survey responses, but also with their activities, is that they needed that information. They were awaiting the next stage in the process, and so we were able to help them through that. Today, we have merged our COVID-19 listening in with our regular executive reporting monthly and quarterly. We continue to watch those top-line metrics, and we're using what we learned in these early months to really further support our business customers now through the loan forgiveness process. So we're actually leveraging our survey tool to reach out and ask if they're planning on an 8-week or a 24-week period in terms of applying for loan forgiveness. So we're, as Jennifer said, I mean, we're still in the thick of it, but certainly taking advantage of all of the opportunities we have to hear what our customers have to say. So I will turn it back over to Jennifer, and I think we're going to talk about what's next.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, and I really like how you laid it out, because it's, the Synovus approach has really been about leveraging data that you have and the feedback mechanisms that you have available to you to kind of direct that. And, obviously there's, a lot of comfort in having communication that's relevant and targeted, and also having it just, in a lot of cases, I know that sometimes we feel like we're over-communicating, but in this particular case, I think Synovus Bank did a great job of appropriately over-communicating and sharing the right detail to just give everyone a certain level of comfort with the process. So as Laura mentioned, we're going to talk about, so what's next. In this section, we're going to focus on what to expect in the future and what specifically banks can do to continue to support small business customers. So that's kind of what we're going to focus on. And we focus a lot in this area from the poll. So in the poll, we specifically asked about future intentions for both the business's operating model and also about their anticipated needs from their financial institutions. We asked about, things like, do they think that they'll remain open? Will they retain their employees or hire employees? What financial solutions will they seek and what will they need the most? And then what will their operating models look like? So, I like all businesses, we're trying to figure out, what we're experiencing today is kind of a short-term thing just to get us through versus, what are those things that reflect long-term expectations that customers are just going to expect on an ongoing basis. All of us are wondering about that. And so that's kind of where we're going to focus today, just on those anticipations. So here's some more good news. For banks that provided financial assistance at this time, most customers gave favorable ratings. And this was good. This was at least good ratings. And what I will say, when I first looked at the results that came in, I said, wow, 74% seems kind of low, given the support that's being provided. And that was what I looked at from just the lens of the results coming in. But given the situation and given how quickly things evolved, I think these results are actually pretty good. I should note that we looked at a couple of data breaks for these results, and we looked at it for business types, so whether they were one of the larger small businesses or whether they were one of the smaller small businesses. Larger small businesses were defined as those that had more than 16 employees. And we did see some notable differences that larger small businesses were more favorable about their financial institutions than those smaller small businesses. We also looked at the results for bank type. So were they a national bank, a regional bank, or a credit union? We did see a significant difference in higher ratings for national banks compared to regional banks or credit unions. So higher ratings for national banks compared to regional or credit unions. And I should mention also that we had a limited number of credit union customers, only 45 out of the 500 respondents. But the differences between national banks and regional banks is something that we'll continue to explore, because it wasn't just in their overall favorability rating. They were rated for some very specific attributes related to product and solution offering, the responsiveness, kind of the overall reaction to the pandemic. And so that's something that we'll continue to drill in on. You'll have more detail in the report that you received to give you some of those highlights. Additionally, so beyond the favorable ratings, we also asked if they, depending on the bank that they worked with to receive financial support during this time, most said that they would stay with that financial institution, so 90%, which is good news. It's good news if you're the financial institution who provided that solution to the existing customer. But as I mentioned, we're focused on silver linings today, and so there is a lot of opportunities with small businesses. I think and kind of what I pulled out here are some of the things that I think are more longer-lasting opportunities. So first, I mentioned that on the previous slide that small businesses are willing to continue with the financial provider who provided them financial assistance during this time. It makes sense because this has been a dire situation, one in which they did need a lot of financial support, and so they're going to feel pretty good about the financial support partner that they received support from. But there is an opportunity for those financial institutions that provided support to small businesses that they hadn't worked with before. About 26% of small businesses reported that they received financial support from a financial institution other than their primary bank. Again, although I don't watch tons and tons of news, I will say I did notice that there were quite a few financial experts in the months of March and April that were encouraging small businesses to cast a wide net in terms of applying for PPP and other financial institutions. That reflects an opportunity for those banks that were given exposure to new customers that maybe they wouldn't have exposure to before. Because if you did provide financial support to those new customers, they're likely to continue with you. So many of those businesses looked outside of their current provider and ended up receiving support. And so we anticipate that they are more likely to switch in the future based on those experiences. I would recommend, based on these findings, although, it's a poll, and so, kind of listening to what's in the media and what I've heard from some of our clients, I would recommend that banks look at your small business customers to see if they reached out for support, but they didn't receive it, or if they didn't reach out at all, because this may be an at-risk segment for you in the future. And so you may want to reach out to them to see if you can provide continued support, even though they didn't receive it from you initially, to help them see if there's options. I mentioned that we asked a couple of questions around financial need and what banks could do better. Businesses report overall wanting a financial provider that's their partner. They want a responsive partner that helps them think through the best options given their specific business and financial situation. Overall, a lot of those businesses mentioned needing to find a financial balance, and not really knowing how to do that. In fact, when we asked small businesses to rank order their needs for financial support, the third ranked item was financial wellness. Of course, loans and cash management were the top two ranked financial solutions, which focus on supporting businesses' cash flow. But businesses were also looking for their banks to take on that partner role and support their efforts towards financial wellness. I think that's an important finding as we think through how to support businesses moving forward. We also found, in terms of opportunities, that there's opportunities related to channel experiences. I showed you that picture of the man standing in an ATM outside of his vehicle. Some of that might have been that he'd been in a truck, but I tend to kind of tell a story around, that he's a typical branch user. And so while a lot of small business Well, some small businesses complained about limited or no channel support. We asked about their anticipated channel usage moving forward. And, if you look in the financial institutions, kind of media coverage today, many talk about digital conversion. What can we do to support digital conversion? And we're seeing that happen. So 57% of small businesses reported that they plan to use digital channels more in the future than they have in the past. That's probably because they've been given that exposure to know that they can do it, and they will continue to do it. So like other industries and other customer segments, we're seeing it with consumers too. We also see that because digital rates are increasing for small businesses, it begs us to ask the question, do your banks have specific small business digital platforms or tools available to them that would meet their needs specifically? Again, it's just an opportunity beyond the consumer segment, which really gets me to my next point in that I've heard that a lot of banking clients, Synovus Bank being one of them, are really happy that they didn't turn off their CX program because it really gave them an information source from customer feedback to generate insights about what was happening related to experiences, what their expectations were, and what the impact of the pandemic had been on them specifically and their interactions with the bank. So there was a lot of insight there that we would not have had if your program was shut off. But one takeaway that I've had in just my conversations with all of the banking clients that I talk to day in and day out is that some may not have enough focus on small businesses specifically as a segment. Many times small businesses as a customer segment is lumped in with the retail bank and with consumers because they act similarly through channel usage. And sometimes, those small businesses do not have the size to warrant a relationship manager like what you would assign with your commercial banking customers. So there is an opportunity to continue to listen specifically to small businesses to figure out how their needs are different. Their needs have been very different during this pandemic compared to consumers, so that you have kind of your ear to generate insights that might be specific to them, and that your solution and product offering will reflect their needs moving forward. This small business poll that we conducted as part of InMoment, while not extremely deep, and it didn't provide competitive benchmarks, it really helped to quantify the impact of the pandemic on businesses and banking relationships. And I think it gives us insights into, deciding whether we should start to measure small business experiences separately outside of consumer experiences, at least in the near term. And I know this slide is something that, and it's part of the report that we'll provide, but we asked in an open-end way how banks could support them in the future. And you see the top 10 mentions here. Again, it was an open comment. The suggestions came directly from small businesses. You can see that they focus on product, service, communication, policy, and of course, channel recommendations. So if you were to take one thing away on what you should focus on, it's these 10 things. Now I'll turn it back to Laura to help us wrap up here to talk about what Synovus is planning to do for small businesses in terms of support, or I guess I should say continue to do for small businesses. Laura?
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. And I'm glad you mentioned the importance of focusing on small business as a segment, unique from retail consumers. As branch transactors, small businesses have absolutely been included in our interaction surveys, but we know we can go deeper. And I think COVID has definitely shown us that. We planned at the end of last year to lift up B2B, voice of the customer, as a next step in maturing our VOC program. And as I said, the COVID crisis has just further cemented that as a priority for us. So our mantra in our CX practice has been listen, evaluate, act, and measure. And we'll be using this same framework to not only build out our B2B research, but to ensure that we're acting upon those insights. So to give you a sense of what we're planning, under Listen, we will not only establish business-specific surveys, but incorporating sample management, which is really critical with smaller populations, such as our business customers. We have a lot of interest in the organization right now around voice of the customer for this population, and the last thing we want to do is just overtax our sample. And we know that can happen very quickly and very easily. Under Evaluate, we'll definitely be leveraging text analytics and key driver analyses with our InMoment partners to pull out those data-driven insights and themes. We've seen this work really well on our consumer customer populations, and so we know this will really help take us from that anecdotal feedback we have today to much more actionable and focused efforts, the key driver analysis being critical there. Under ACT, this is where our CX practitioners will really get into the mix, and they'll be able to use the voice of the customer insights that we gather to work with our line of business partners and define those target state journeys for our customers, and really help identify what are the critical process improvements that we can make. For instance, what can we do to take friction out of the loan process? We know that's going to be a hot topic, especially for small business. And then all that, of course, comes back together as we define key metrics such as loyalty and satisfaction. We want to understand what service expectations are and whether we're meeting those in our service delivery. And as Jennifer highlighted from the poll, we know guidance and advice is really going to be something we focus on. And so making sure that that's included in our listening posts so that we can accurately measure that on the back end. So we're excited to be doing this work. I'm glad that coming out of COVID, one of our key priorities we identified before the crisis is still standing strong. And we know that we're going to get a lot of value out of this because we will be talking to these customers from where they are, specifically as small business owners, rather than just including them in our global retail banking audience. So Jennifer, I think you're going to close us up.
Yep. Again, I think Laura, and again, I think that I wholeheartedly agree with Laura and Synovus Bank's strategy, and I think it's a good one. And I think that they'll generate a lot of insights, particularly as we continue to deal with the pandemic and then coming out of the pandemic. I think there will be a lot of value that comes out of that approach. But if we were to kind of put 4 key takeaways that we hope that you took away from today is, first, don't stop listening. I think that, as I mentioned, your CX program most likely has been the only data source that your leadership could rely on during this time to really understand what's happening and what expectations there are and how you're delivering today. So don't stop listening. And I think that Laura mentioned, kind of taking a different strategy in terms of listening to meet needs. So it's not that things have to be status quo. You can change things based on your need, but continue to listen to your customers. The second thing is, which I think is probably the most positive thing that I took away from the poll that we conducted, is that while the pandemic has given us a lot to be concerned about and a lot to be anxious about, there is an opportunity. There is an opportunity there. And, my parents used to say everything is an opportunity. This pandemic certainly highlights that. It highlights it personally, but it's highlighted opportunities that banks have with small businesses too. So, think about the things that you've learned either because small businesses are struggling there. That's an opportunity to develop something new to do it better in the future. If they're giving you, if you've attracted new customers as part of the pandemic, those that may not have sought you out before, but you've helped deliver in their time of need, take advantage of that opportunity to deepen a relationship with them. Everything is an opportunity. The other thing is continue to press the metal on your digital conversion strategies and your digital strategies overall. It's going to pay off because everyone, whether you're a consumer, a business, you're going to more heavily rely on digital platforms moving forward, particularly if they're completely, effective and meet the needs of your customers. And then finally, part of what we learned from the poll and, what Laura's taken away from the feedback that she's received is small businesses aren't just looking for a financial service provider. They're looking for someone that can help them weigh their options and be a partner for them and make the best decisions for their business. Again, it's a more consultative approach. It's if your banks have been focused on financial wellness and, meeting needs and providing advice, which many of you have, this is just an extension to small businesses. So those are the 4 takeaways. And Melissa, I'll turn it over to you for questions.
Great. Thanks so much. We did have some questions come in during the presentation, so I'm going to read those now. And we're going to start with one for you, Laura. We had a question about what type of text analytics you're using for COVID-specific listening in your overall listening program. Can you speak to that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are leveraging the text analytics, particularly sentiment within the Merit CX platform. Specifically for COVID, we added trigger words, additional trigger words to pull out those comments. The trigger kicked off for us a daily report within the platform that we reviewed and reported on. And because we were watching these comments daily, it was fairly straightforward for us to summarize by sentiment and topic. But certainly with greater volume and as time goes on, the text analytics within the platform really makes us more efficient and more accurate as we ensure that we're categorizing things correctly and effectively.
Great. Jennifer, one question for you. What is the anticipated impact for those who didn't receive PPP?
Yeah, so in the webinar today, I focused on I believe it was 78% that those that applied for PPP and received it. So that there's a group of people that applied for PPP and didn't receive it, and so we did look at that particular subgroup as part of our report. And so if you're wondering if all of your efforts around PPP had an impact or not, it did, because those that applied for PPP and didn't receive are more likely to report that they anticipate that they're going to close in the future. They're more likely to report that they will lose employees, and so there is more negative outcomes for those that applied for PPP and didn't receive it. So if you're wondering if all your efforts around PPP made a difference, it did. The other thing that I would just mention is that when we looked at financial needs for those, again, that applied for PPP and didn't receive it, they were more likely to choose products and services that were more reactive. So they were more likely to say they're in need of deferment or they're in need of debt consolidation. So their financial needs tended to be more reactive than focusing on how to improve cash flow.
Got it. Another question we had is, how would you recommend that we explore feedback from small businesses within our CX program? Jennifer, I'll have you answer that one too.
Yeah, I'll start, and then maybe Laura could kind of reiterate some of the key points from her approach. But I would say that one opportunity is to and I know that some of our clients are looking to do that, is to do some type of poll like the one that we did at InMoment, which again is a kind of a broad poll, not focused on a particular footprint or for a particular bank. Do some type of poll one time among small businesses just to understand what their needs are and how the bank can help them. I should mention that we're more than willing to share the questionnaire that we used for this broader poll, this kind of more national poll with you. So if you want to take parts of those questions so that you ask them in the same way so you can make some comparisons between our poll results and the poll that you would do for your bank specifically, that's something that we're willing to provide and help with if you need. But I think that one way is just to conduct a direct poll among your small business customers today. The other opportunity is to leverage what you already have. So generally speaking, small businesses are typically included as part of retail banking programs. So you're asking about their call center experiences. You're asking about their branch experiences. You can leverage that data and just pull out small business customers specifically and look at their results independent of consumer audiences to see if there's anything that you can specifically glean there. And then finally, another opportunity for your ongoing tracking studies where you have small businesses included. You can include a few questions at the end of that existing survey that would be specific to small business owners and financial decision makers to ask them about anything the bank could do to further support their need right now. Laura, is there anything else that you would add to that based on what you guys have in place?
Yeah, Jennifer, I think you hit on. I think you really hit on it. One of the things you mentioned was the inclusion in the retail survey, and I mentioned too our branch survey that keys off of transactions definitely includes business customers. And while we've been identifying them, I think we have the opportunity now to further tailor the survey. So not go too far off what we've been measuring, but as they come into the survey, we know that they're business customers, and so we can tailor our conversation and the survey questions to the business and speak more directly to them versus being very high level and generic. So I think we'll definitely pursue that. And then, of course, from a relationship perspective, I think it's really critical to understand, if we are meeting their expectations, and especially from a service perspective, because that's changed, right? I mean, we're more and more having virtual interactions with our customers overall. What can we do as an organization to meet our small businesses where they are from a technology and virtual banking perspective, not just from those transactions and digital banking platforms, but in just meeting with their their relationship managers and meeting with team members at the branch. So we'll pursue some of those things with ours.
Great. And last question we have as of right now is, what does financial wellness mean for small businesses?
Yeah, I think that financial wellness relates to that partnership that I described earlier, related to kind of laying out the options. So there's tons of options, some of which may or may not be a good fit for an individual business based on, their model, their finances, their future anticipated operating model. And, I think about all the restaurants today that, that they're operating, but they're operating in a limited capacity, 6 feet between tables, maybe only having outdoor dining. What if they never had outdoor dining and they're having to create it? There's just a lot of options there that I think that small businesses are just really appreciating those banks that are taking the extra effort to sit down and really understand their situation, what they're hoping to achieve, and then providing and offering solutions that would meet that specific need.
Great. Okay, so that is the last question we had. That's going to wrap up today's event. The presentation and a recording of the presentation will be shared post-event in the next 24 hours, so look for that. Thank you, Jennifer and Laura, for participating, and we really appreciate that. If you have a question that wasn't asked or answered today, definitely reach out to us. But with that, from all of us at InMoment, thanks for your time and have a great remainder of the day.